It's funny how a life can pivot on a single ordinary day. For me, that day was a Saturday in early October, my daughter Chloe's 45th birthday. The air in my little Charlotte condo was sweet with the smell of sugar and buttercream because sitting on my kitchen counter was a work of art that had cost me $250. It was a 3-layer salted caramel and chocolate torte from the fanciest bakery in town. Chloe's favorite. For my only child, nothing was ever too much. I adjusted the single elegant candle in the center, my heart doing that familiar flutter, a mix of love and, if I'm being honest, a little bit of anxiety. It had always been like that with Chloe. A quiet, gnawing feeling that I was one wrong step away from disappointing her. While I let the cake settle, I walked into my small study. On my desk, next to a photo of my late husband Michael, was my most treasured possession. It wasn't jewelry or anything of monetary value. It was an old leather-bound accounting ledger with the words, "A Mother's Ledger," embossed in faded gold on the cover. Michael had given it to me when Chloe was born. He was an accountant, you see, and he'd joked, "You're going to have a lot to keep track of." But I never used it for money. I used it for memories. I ran my hand over the worn cover and opened it to a random page. On the left, in my looping cursive, it read, June 1995. Chloe's high school graduation. That smile when they called her name. A priceless day. On the right-hand page was a faded photo of her in her cap and gown, beaming. I turned another page. August 2005. Chloe's wedding. She looked like an angel. The most beautiful day of my life. Taped next to it was a dried gardenia from her bouquet. This book was the story of my life. A life dedicated, willingly and joyfully, to her happiness. But as I stood there, a different memory pricked at the edges of my mind. Chloe, a few months ago, waving off my offer to help with the twins' school fundraiser. "It's fine, Mom," she'd said with that impatient edge to her voice. "I don't need you to turn it into a whole production." It was a small thing, but it had stung. I shook the feeling off, like I always did. "You're being too sensitive, Eleanor," I told myself. "She's stressed. David's job situation, the twins, it's a lot. My job was to make her life easier, not to add to her burdens with my feelings." Still, that little knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I decided to call her, just to be sure, just a quick check-in before I drove the 30 minutes to that beautiful house I'd helped her buy. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Her voice rushed. "Mom? Hi. I'm a little busy." "I know, honey. I won't keep you," I said, my voice bright, maybe a little too bright. "I just wanted to make sure you and David would be home for the next hour or so. I have your surprise, and I'm about to head over." There was a pause. Not a long one, but just enough for me to feel my smile start to falter. "Oh, right. The surprise," she said, the words flat. "Yeah, we're here. We're not going anywhere." "Wonderful. I can't wait for you to see it," I chirped, trying to inject the excitement I so desperately wanted to feel between us. Then she said the thing that, looking back, was the first tremor before the earthquake. Her tone shifted, becoming weary, almost parental. "I know, Mom. Just, let's not make it a huge production, okay? You know how Dad used to be on birthdays, treating them like they were national holidays. It was always more about his grand gestures than about the person he was celebrating." I froze, my hand clutching the phone. Michael had adored celebrating his family. His grand gestures, as she called them, were the stuff of legend surprise picnics, ridiculous, oversized presents, singing telegrams. They were pure, unabashed outpourings of his love. And here was our daughter, our Chloe, twisting that love into a performance, twisting his memory into something selfish. "Oh," I finally managed to say, the word a tiny puff of air. "Okay, honey. No production. I understand." "Great. See you in a bit," she said, and the line went dead. I stood there in the quiet of my condo, the sweet smell of the cake suddenly cloying, almost sickening. I told myself she didn't mean it that way. I told myself she was just stressed. I told myself all the things I had been telling myself for 45 years. But for the first time, the excuses felt thin, like a worn-out blanket that could no longer keep out the cold. Putting on a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes, I carefully placed the expensive cake into its box, grabbed my purse, and walked out the door. I was still a mother on her way to her daughter's birthday. But I was also, unknowingly, a woman walking toward the end of her life as she knew it. The 30-minute drive to Chloe's neighborhood felt longer than usual. With every passing mile, I tried to argue myself out of the unease her phone call had left behind. "Don't be silly, Eleanor," I chided myself. "She's 45, not a little girl. She doesn't need grand gestures anymore." I pictured her as a child, her face smeared with chocolate from a birthday cupcake, and my heart ached with a fierce, protective love. That was my Chloe. My brilliant, beautiful, complicated girl. Her sharp edges were just a sign of her intelligence, I'd always told myself. And the stress she was under would soften anyone. I was her mother. My job was to absorb those sharp edges, not to be wounded by them. Pulling into her subdivision was like entering a movie set. Every lawn was a perfect emerald carpet. Every house a gleaming monument to success. I parked in front of her 2-story colonial, a handsome brick building with tasteful landscaping and a glossy black door. A familiar swell of pride rose in me, followed by a familiar, quiet sting. This was the house my life savings had made possible. The $150,000 down payment had liquidated almost everything I had, but seeing the joy on her and David's faces when they got the keys, that was supposed to have been worth it. I took a deep breath, pasted on my best smile, and lifted the heavy cake box. This was Chloe's birthday. It was going to be a happy day. I decided it would be. David opened the door before I even rang the bell. The sight of him immediately confirmed that the chill I felt wasn't just in my head. He looked deflated. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, and his smile was a brief, nervous twitch that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He had the haunted look of a man staring at a mountain of bills he had no way to pay. "Hey, Eleanor," he mumbled, stepping aside. He didn't offer to take the cake. He didn't make eye contact for more than a second. "Happy birthday to Chloe," I said, my voice unnaturally cheerful to fill the empty space. "Where's the birthday girl?" "In the kitchen," he said, already retreating toward the living room. "Coffee." Before I could answer, Chloe emerged from the archway. She was dressed in expensive-looking lounge pants and a cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She was, as always, beautiful. But her smile was a porcelain mask, brittle and cold. It didn't touch her eyes, which scanned the large cake box in my hands with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't happiness. It was more like weary assessment, as if I'd just handed her a problem to solve. "Mom, you really shouldn't have," she said, her voice a sigh. It wasn't the warm, appreciative "you shouldn't have" of someone receiving a lovely surprise. It was the exasperated "you shouldn't have" of someone who now had to deal with an unwanted burden. "It's your favorite," I said, placing it on the vast granite island in her kitchen. "Salted caramel and chocolate. I had them add the little edible gold flakes you like." I opened the box, revealing the masterpiece inside. For a moment, I expected a flicker of that little girl, the one who would have gasped with delight. Instead, Chloe just stared at it, her head tilted. "Wow, that's a lot of cake, Mom. Where am I even supposed to put all of that? The fridge is completely full." David just stood there by the coffee maker, staring into his mug as if it held the answers to the universe. His silence was an endorsement of her coolness, a quiet betrayal that somehow stung more than her words. "Well, we can have a slice now, to celebrate," I suggested, my voice faltering. "And then you can share it with friends. Or the twins'll love it when they get home from their sleepover." Chloe picked up a dish rag and wiped down a perfectly clean spot on the counter next to the sink. "Honestly, it's a bit much. It's just a birthday, not a coronation." There it was again, a direct echo of her comment on the phone. A dismissal not just of the cake, but of the love and the money it represented. It was a calculated jab at the memory of her father, and by extension, at me. "I just wanted to do something nice," I whispered, my throat suddenly tight. "I know you did," she said, finally looking at me. But there was no warmth in her gaze, only a deep, unsettling impatience. "David, Can you help me find a container for all this? We need to talk to my mom. She said it as if I wasn't even in the room. David nodded mutely, and the two of them shuffled into the walk-in pantry, their hushed, tense whispers immediately filling the space behind the closed door. I was left standing alone in the center of her cavernous, magazine-perfect kitchen. The beautiful, expensive cake sat on the counter between us, an unwanted orphan. The silence of the house was absolute, broken only by the hum of the stainless steel refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. And in that perfect, silent house, I felt a cold dread creep into my bones. I knew this wasn't just a bad mood. This wasn't just stress. This was the beginning of the end. And I had a terrible, sinking feeling that the talk my daughter wanted to have was going to destroy me. The pantry door finally opened, the sound making me jump. Chloe stepped out, David hovering behind her like a nervous shadow. Whatever they had been discussing was over, and the look on Chloe's face sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. The brittle mask of politeness was gone. In its place was a look of cold, hard resolution. It was the look of a surgeon before the first incision, utterly devoid of emotion. "Mom," she said, her voice flat. "Let's go sit in the living room." She didn't wait for my answer, just turned and walked toward the front of the house. I followed her automatically, my feet feeling like lead. David scurried back to the kitchen, a silent coward seeking refuge by the coffee pot. The living room was Chloe's showpiece. A pristine, magazine-perfect space with a white sofa no one ever sat on and a collection of art books on the coffee table that I don't think had ever been opened. It was a room designed to be looked at, not lived in, and as I perched on the edge of a stiff armchair, I suddenly felt like one of the exhibits. Chloe sat opposite me on the sofa, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked like she was about to conduct a performance review. "You know, Mom," she began, her voice steady, "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About my life, my birthday, about presents, about what would truly make me happy." My heart, which had been lodged in my throat, dropped with a sudden, dizzying sense of relief. Of course, this was about money. It was always about money. My mind instantly started racing. David's job. The twins need braces soon. Maybe they want to do that big landscaping project. I was already calculating how much I could pull from my retirement account without facing a penalty, how I could rearrange my budget. A familiar warmth spread through me. This I could handle. This I could fix. This was my purpose. "Of course, my love," I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through my anxiety. "Anything. You know that. Just tell me what you want. A trip? That new car you mentioned? Whatever it is, we'll make it happen." She let my words hang in the air for a moment, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. What I saw there was not the daughter I knew. It was a stranger, a cold, empty vessel. "The one thing I'd love most as a birthday present," she said slowly, savoring each word like a piece of expensive chocolate, "is for you to just die." The world didn't stop. It shattered. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall suddenly sounded like hammer blows against my skull. The sunlight streaming through the plantation blinds seemed to bleach all the color from the room. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold, rushing sound filling my ears. My own daughter, my baby, had wished for my death as a gift. What? The word was a strangled whisper, a breath of disbelief. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," she continued, her voice never wavering from its calm, reasonable tone. That was the most horrific part. She wasn't angry. She was stating a fact. "I'm tired, Mom. I am so tired of you. Of your constant calls, your unannounced visits, your need to be involved in every little thing. My life would be so much easier, so much happier, if you would just disappear." My hands were shaking in my lap, tremors I couldn't control. 72 years of living, 45 years of being her mother, and not once, not even in my darkest nightmare, had I ever imagined this moment. "Chloe," I managed to say, the sobs already choking me. "I'm your mother. I have given you everything. I have sacrificed everything for you." "Exactly," she snapped, the first crack in her composure. She stood up, pacing in front of the fireplace. "That's the problem. Your sacrifices are a cage. I can't breathe with you constantly hovering, with your drama and your bottomless emotional needs. You use your love like a weapon, Mom, to make me feel guilty, to keep me indebted to you. I'm not a little girl anymore. I need freedom." Freedom. She needed freedom from my love. The words didn't compute. My brain simply couldn't process them. I got up from the chair, my legs trembling so badly I thought they would buckle. Each step toward the door felt like I was wading through wet concrete. As I reached the archway back to the hall, I glanced into the kitchen. The beautiful cake, my offering of love, sat on the counter, a gaudy, mocking monument to my foolishness. I turned one last time, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes, hoping to see a flicker of regret, a sign of the sweet little girl who used to hug my legs and call me the best mommy in the world. But there was nothing. Only impatience. The impatience of someone waiting for an unpleasant task to be over. The relief of someone who had finally said the terrible, secret thing they'd been holding inside for years. "Happy birthday, Chloe," I murmured to the empty air. And I walked out of that house, closing the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't scream. I just closed it. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that I had not just left a house. I had just closed the door on my entire life. I don't remember the drive home. I'm sure my hands were on the steering wheel, that my foot worked the pedals. I must have stopped at red lights and stayed in my lane, because I arrived at my condo in one piece, but I recall none of it. The entire world outside my car windows had seemed muted and distant, a silent film playing that had nothing to do with me. My reality had shrunk to the ringing in my ears and the hollowed-out cavern where my heart used to be. I fumbled with the keys, my hands still shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the door open. I stepped inside, and the silence of my own home rushed in to meet me. It was a place I'd always thought of as my sanctuary, my peaceful little corner of the world. But now, the quiet was an accusation. The air was thick with the ghosts of 45 years of self-deception. I closed the door, and the lock clicking into place was the sound that broke the dam. The sob that tore its way out of my chest was a raw, animal sound of pure agony. It wasn't a cry, it was a howl. I slid down the door and curled into a ball on the floor, the grief so total, so physically crushing, that I thought it might actually kill me. My daughter's words echoed in my head, a relentless, torturous loop. "The greatest gift is for you to just die. Die. Die." I cried for the little girl she had been, and for the monster she had become. But most of all, I cried for the fool I had been, a mother so blinded by love that she couldn't see the truth. Hours passed, the sun set, and my living room filled with shadows. I was empty, hollowed out, and aching with a pain so profound I had no name for it. My eyes, swollen and blurry, landed on my study, on the desk, on the familiar, comforting shape of the leather ledger. My first instinct was to crawl to it, to open its pages and lose myself in the memories of a time when her smile was genuine, when an "I love you, Mommy" wasn't followed by a request for money. I needed to remember the good times, to prove to myself that it hadn't all been a lie. I stumbled into the study and picked up the book, its weight familiar in my hands. I opened it to a page from her teenage years, Chloe's prom night. She looked like a real-life princess. I remembered the dress, a ridiculous pink thing with sequins that she'd fallen in love with. I had worked 3 months of overtime shifts, picking up every extra hour of nursing I could, just to afford it. And that's when something inside me shifted. The grief, so vast and suffocating, began to burn at the edges, replaced by something colder, sharper. I looked at the sentimental words I had written, and for the first time, I saw the lie. It wasn't a priceless memory. It had a price, a very specific one. My hand was trembling as I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a pen. I went back to the page. Next to the words, "She looked like a real-life princess," I wrote in stark block letters. $850, 3 months of overtime shifts. A gasp escaped my lips. I turned the page. Chloe's college graduation. A priceless day. I uncapped the pen again. $42,000. Second mortgage on my first home. Page after page, I went through the ledger. It wasn't a book of memories anymore. It was a book of evidence. My life's work, my sacrifices, my love story. It was all being reduced to a brutal, unflinching audit. Chloe's wedding, the most beautiful day of my life. $35,000, drained my emergency savings. The twins' braces, a grandparent's joy. $4,000, ate rice and beans for 6 weeks. And finally, the big one. Chloe and David's beautiful new home, a dream come true. $150,000, my entire retirement fund. With every number I wrote, a layer of delusion was stripped away. I wasn't just a loving mother. I was an enabler. An ATM. The questions I had spent a lifetime pushing down now screamed in my mind. Did my love become a blank check? Did I teach her that my only value was my money? Did my desperate, pathetic need to be needed create the very monster who now wished I was dead? The answer was a resounding, soul-crushing yes. I hadn't been giving her love. I had been making transactions. I was paying for her affection, for a seat at her table, for the right to be called Mom. And today, she had told me my account was closed. My value had run out. I reached the last entry I'd made, and with a shaking hand, I started adding up the numbers in the margin. The final sum was so huge, so obscene, that I had to check it twice. Over $500,000. Not including the day-to-day costs, the groceries, the endless gifts, just the big things. $500,000 to raise a daughter who wished I was dead. I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the desk, but I barely heard it. I just stared at the number, at the story it told. It was an invoice for a life, my life. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my gut. But it was surrounded now by a towering, righteous rage. The love was gone. All that was left was the cost. And it was a debt I would make sure she understood, one way or another. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep was an impossible luxury, a distant shore I couldn't reach. Instead, I lay awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, while the last 45 years of my life replayed in my mind. But this time, I wasn't seeing it through the soft, forgiving filter of a mother's love. I was seeing it through the cold, harsh lens of the ledger. Each memory was now branded with a number, a cost. The phantom pain of my broken heart was still there, a dull, constant ache. But something new was forming around it, something hard and sharp and strong. It was rage, yes, but it was more than that. It was the icy, clarifying fury of a woman who has finally realized she has nothing left to lose. When the first pale light of dawn crept through my window, it felt different. It wasn't the start of another lonely day. It was the start of a war. I got out of bed, not with the weary shuffle of a grieving old woman, but with a purpose I hadn't felt in decades. I walked into the study and looked at the ledger, still open on my desk. I didn't hide it away. I didn't tear out the pages. I simply closed it, the sound of the heavy leather cover thudding shut, echoing in the quiet room. Then I placed it squarely in the center of my desk. It was no longer a scrapbook of my heart. It was Exhibit A. I went into the kitchen, made a pot of coffee so strong and black it could strip paint, and sat down at my laptop. The tears were gone. The victim who had crumpled to the floor yesterday was gone. In her place sat a retired cardiac nurse, a woman who knew precisely how to find a problem and methodically, clinically, cut it out. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I didn't type family counselor or therapist. I knew this wound was far too deep for therapy to heal. My search terms were cold and specific. Asset protection lawyer, Charlotte, NC. Contract dispute attorney. Elder financial abuse. The results were a sea of smiling faces and reassuring slogans. A compassionate voice for your family, fighting for what matters most. I clicked past them all with a sneer. I didn't need compassion. I had been compassionate for 45 years, and it had gotten me a daughter who wished I was dead. I needed a weapon. I kept scrolling, digging deeper, until I found a name that stood out from the rest. Arthur Chen. His firm's website was stark, almost severe. No stock photos of happy families, no empty promises, just clean lines and black text. His own photo was serious, unsmiling. his eyes intelligent and direct. His biography was short and brutally efficient, stripped of all fluff. It was filled with phrases like complex financial litigation, breach of contract, and asset recovery. Then I saw the line that made me stop breathing. A small, unassuming sentence at the very end of his professional summary. Specializing in the formal dissolution of financially entangled family agreements. Financially entangled family agreements. That was it. That was the language. He had given a name to the suffocating cage I had been living in for my entire adult life. It wasn't a family. It was a financially entangled agreement. And it was time for its formal dissolution. My hand was perfectly steady as I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the screen. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. Law offices of Arthur Chen. How may I direct your call? I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Chen, I said, my voice as calm and even as if I were ordering groceries. As soon as possible. Of course, the receptionist replied. May I ask what this is regarding? I paused, looking at the closed ledger on my desk. I thought of the $500,000 figure. I thought of Chloe's cold, impatient eyes, and I answered with a clarity that felt like a blade. Yes, I said. It's regarding a series of long-term, high-value investments that have defaulted. I need to discuss the complete liquidation of my assets. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before she said, I have an opening tomorrow morning at 10. I'll be there, I said, and hung up the phone. I sat back in my chair, the black coffee still steaming beside me. The grief hadn't vanished. I knew it would likely live with me forever, a scar on my soul. But for the first time since Chloe had shattered my world, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was a grim, steely resolve, a glimmer of steel. The victim was gone. The investor was here to collect on a debt. The next morning, I dressed with the kind of care I usually reserved for weddings or funerals. I chose a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress, a string of my late husband's pearls, and low, practical heels. I wasn't dressing to impress. I was putting on armor. Arthur Chen's office was on the 30th floor of a gleaming glass and steel tower downtown. Stepping out of the elevator felt like entering a different world, one that operated on quiet power and expensive leather. The air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and ambition. There were no family photos on the walls, only abstract art in muted colors. It was a place where emotions were checked at the door, and I felt a strange sense of comfort in its sterility. A receptionist led me down a long hall to a corner office with a breathtaking view of the Charlotte skyline. Arthur Chen rose from behind a large, uncluttered mahogany desk to greet me. He was exactly as his photo had suggested, sharp, serious, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. He wasn't handsome in a conventional way, but he radiated an intensity that was far more compelling. He shook my hand, his grip firm and brief. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice calm and even. Please, have a seat. Tell me what's on your mind. I sat in the leather chair opposite him, my purse clutched in my lap. I had rehearsed this moment in my head all morning, planning to lay out the facts coolly and logically, just as he had on his website. But the moment I opened my mouth, the emotion I had suppressed so fiercely threatened to betray me. My daughter, I began, my voice catching on the word. On her birthday last Saturday, she told me. She wished I was dead. I recounted the entire story, the words tumbling out in a rush, the cake, the coldness in her house, the final brutal conversation in her perfect, sterile living room. I felt the familiar sting of tears behind my eyes, the hot shame of the victim. I expected him to offer a platitude, a murmur of sympathy, maybe even push a box of tissues across the desk. He did none of those things. He simply listened, his expression unreadable, his gaze never leaving my face. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the office, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic. Then, he leaned forward slightly and said the words that would change everything. Mrs. Vance, I'm not a therapist, so I won't insult you by pretending to understand the depth of your pain, he said, his tone direct but not unkind. But I am a lawyer, and from a legal perspective your feelings are irrelevant. What is relevant are the assets, the obligations, and the contracts. So let's talk about those. I stared at him, stunned. He had taken my lifetime of agony, my shattered heart, and had refused to engage with it. Instead, he had given it a name, a legal problem. And just like that, he had given me the greatest gift imaginable. He had taken my unbearable pain and turned it into something solvable. The tears immediately dried up. "Okay," I said, my voice clear and steady for the first time. "Let's talk about those." For the next hour, Arthur Chen became the architect of my vengeance. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a master strategist. He took the chaotic, painful mess of my life and organized it into a clear, methodical plan of attack. "First," he said, pulling a yellow legal pad toward him, "the joint bank account. You mentioned a $20,000 emergency fund. That's the first domino. It is a shared asset, which means you have every legal right to withdraw the full amount. There is no need to notify her. This is your first action item. I want you to go to your bank this afternoon and transfer every cent into a new account under your name only." I nodded, a thrill of terrifying power running through me. "Second, the house," he continued, his pen scratching across the paper. "You are the co-signer on the mortgage. This doesn't just make you liable, it gives you leverage. You mentioned her husband is unemployed. This is a material change in their financial stability, which may be a breach of the terms of your co-signer agreement. I want you to bring me a copy of that contract. We are going to examine every clause." My mind reeled. The very act I had performed out of love rescuing their mortgage had now become my most powerful weapon. "And third, and this is the most critical," he said, his eyes meeting mine with grim intensity. "Your will. As of this moment, despite her words, Chloe is still your primary beneficiary. If something were to happen to you on the way home from my office, you would, in effect, be granting her birthday wish and her inheritance in one fell swoop." The brutal logic of his words hit me like a physical blow. "We revoke that will and draft a new one. Today." He pushed the legal pad across the desk toward me. It contained a neat, numbered list, a battle plan. My grief hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a crushing weight. It was fuel. I stood up and shook his hand, my grip as firm as his had been. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. I'll have that mortgage contract on your desk tomorrow. I'm going to the bank now." As I walked out of his office and stepped into the elevator, the city of Charlotte spread out before me through the glass walls. For the first time in days, I wasn't looking back at the life that had been destroyed. I was looking forward to the justice I was about to build. The architect had drawn up the plans. Now, it was time for the demolition to begin. I walked out of Arthur Chen's building and into the bright Charlotte sunshine. The pavement felt solid under my feet for the first time in a week. The roar of the city traffic, which had felt so menacing before, now sounded like a symphony of purpose. I had a plan. I had a destination. My bank was 3 blocks away, and I walked those blocks with a stride I didn't know I still possessed. My head was high, my back was straight, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't walking to solve someone else's problem. I was walking to solve my own. The bank lobby was cool and quiet, a familiar space I'd been coming to for over 30 years. The branch manager, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, saw me and smiled warmly. "Eleanor, good to see you. What can we do for you today?" He'd known me for years, had helped me set up Chloe's first savings account, had patiently explained the terms of the second mortgage I'd taken out for her college education. He saw me as a sweet old lady, a doting mother. He had no idea he was looking at a revolutionary. "Hello, James," I said, my voice even. "I need to make a few changes to my accounts. Could we speak in your office?" Once we were seated across from his large, tidy desk, I didn't waste time with small talk. I slid my account information across the table. "I need to close joint savings account number 74828, I stated, "and I need to transfer the entire balance, down to the last cent, into a new individual savings account opened solely in my name." Mr. Henderson's friendly smile faltered. He typed something into his computer, his brow furrowing. "Okay," he said slowly. "Eleanor, this is the emergency fund you share with your daughter Chloe, isn't it? There's just over $20,000 here." He looked up at me, his eyes full of genuine, fatherly concern. "Is everything all right?" There it was, the moment of truth. A test. The old Eleanor would have crumbled. She would have offered a rambling, tearful explanation, seeking his validation, his permission. But the old Eleanor was gone. I channeled the cool, clinical precision of Arthur Chen. "Yes, it is," I said, my gaze firm and unwavering. "My personal financial circumstances have changed, and this is a necessary structural adjustment. I need it done immediately." The corporate jargon sounded strange coming from my mouth, but it was a shield. It was a language of finality, a language that left no room for emotional debate. Mr. Henderson saw the steel in my eyes, recognized the shift, and simply nodded. "Of course, Eleanor. Right away." I watched his fingers fly across the keyboard. I heard the quiet hum of the printer. He slid a single piece of paper toward me. It was a receipt confirming the closure of the old account and the opening of the new one. It was just a slip of paper, a few lines of ink, but it felt like a declaration of independence, a surge of something wild and unfamiliar. A terrifying, exhilarating cocktail of power and adrenaline shot through me. The first chain had been broken. It was done. It was real. Back in my condo, the silence felt different. It wasn't the heavy, grieving silence of the day before. It was a charged silence, the quiet hum of a machine that has just been activated. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my armchair, waiting. I knew it wouldn't be long. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed on the end table, rattling against the wood. I looked at the screen. The name CHLOE glowed with a venomous light. My heart hammered against my ribs. My first instinct, a 4-5-year-old reflex, was to grab it, to answer, to manage her anger, to absorb her panic. "Just pick it up, Eleanor. Explain it to her. Make it okay." But Arthur Chen's voice cut through the noise in my head. "Feelings are irrelevant. What is relevant are the assets." I let it ring, and ring, and ring, until it finally fell silent. A moment later, it buzzed again with an incoming text message. My hands were shaking now, but not with fear, with anticipation. I unlocked the screen. The message was exactly what I'd expected. "Mom, the account is empty. What happened? Call me. Now." I stared at the frantic, demanding words. The all-caps, "now," the complete absence of concern, just pure, selfish panic. This was not the text of a daughter who loved me. This was the text of a business partner who had just discovered her funding had been cut. With a strange and wonderful sense of calm, I tapped on her name. I scrolled down past our history of photos and messages, a digital graveyard of a life that was now over. I found the option I was looking for. My finger hovered over the screen for a heart-stopping second before I pressed down firmly. "Block this caller?" "Block." The phone was quiet. The buzzing had stopped. I had fired the first shot. And then, I had silenced the enemy's guns. The first cut is always the deepest, they say. But as the absolute, profound silence settled around me, all I felt was the clean, quiet peace of a wound that could finally begin to heal. The silence from my phone was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. For the rest of the day, there were no frantic calls, no demanding texts, no emotional manipulations trying to breach the new walls I had built. For the first time, the quiet in my condo didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. It felt like control. But I knew this was just the beginning. Arthur Chen had given me a battle plan, and step 1 was complete. Now, it was time for step 2. That evening, I went to the hall closet, a place filled with old photo albums, winter coats, and boxes of memories I hadn't looked at in years. In the very back, behind a stack of Chloe's old report cards, was a heavy document box labeled House. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. There, right on top, was a thick folder, nearly 2 inches thick, with the words Sterling Mortgage Agreement on the tab. I pulled it out, its weight heavy in my hands. I remembered the day we signed these papers. It had been at a stuffy lawyer's office. I was so proud, so full of joy. Chloe and David were beaming, thanking me over and over again. I had felt like the world's best mother, a hero single-handedly making my daughter's dreams come true. I had signed my name on dozens of pages without reading a single word of the fine print. I had been signing a contract of love, I thought. I never realized I was actually signing a contract for my own destruction. I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to. The emotional words inside were meaningless now. Only the legal words mattered, and for those, I needed my architect. I slipped the folder into my handbag, a cold, heavy weight that felt more like a weapon than a legal document. The next morning, I was back in Arthur Chen's office at 10 o'clock sharp. He greeted me with a nod and gestured to the chair. I didn't waste a moment. I placed the thick folder on his desk. "The mortgage contract," I said. A flicker of what might have been approval crossed his features. He put on a pair of sleek, black-framed reading glasses and opened the folder. Watching him work was like watching a master craftsman. He wasn't just reading, he was dissecting. His eyes scanned the dense pages of legalese with an unnerving speed and focus, his finger tracing a line here, his pen making a sharp, small note there. The only sound in the office was the whisper of turning paper. After about 15 minutes, he stopped. He tapped a single paragraph in the middle of a long, convoluted page. "Here it is," he said, a quiet satisfaction in his voice. He turned the document around for me to see, though the block of tiny text was almost impossible to decipher. "Allow me to translate," he said, and read the key phrase aloud. "In the event of a significant and material change in the primary borrower's financial stability, including, but not limited to, termination of employment, the cosigner reserves the right to petition the lender for an immediate review of the loan's standing and may assume primary control." He took off his glasses and looked at me, his eyes sharp. "What this means, Eleanor," he said, his voice cutting through the legal jargon, "is that you don't have to wait for them to miss a payment. You don't need to wait for them to default. The simple fact of a job loss, if we can prove it, is the breach of contract. Legally, their financial instability puts your investment at risk. This clause gives you the right to seize control of the situation to protect that investment. You hold all the cards." He leaned back, his point made. "The only question is, can we definitively prove a material change in their circumstances right now?" I took a slow, deep breath. I had been holding on to this piece of information, this final, devastating card, since the day Chloe had destroyed me. I had wondered when I would play it. Now I knew. I looked directly at Arthur Chen, my voice as cold and calm as the glass and steel surrounding us. "Yes, we can," I said. "David was laid off from his sales job 3 weeks ago. It's his second job loss in 18 months. Chloe told me herself, the day of her birthday. She said she was stressed. Arthur Chen's expression didn't change, but I saw it in his eyes, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He steepled his fingers, a slow, grim smile finally touching his lips. "Well then," he said softly, "that changes everything. The secret weapon isn't just in the contract, Eleanor. You've been holding it the entire time." He pulled his legal pad toward him and began to write. "Here's what we do next. I will draft 2 letters. The first is an official notice to the bank, invoking this clause and stating our intent to take action. The second," he said, looking up at me, "is an ultimatum for your daughter and her husband, a formal, legal demand. We give them a choice. Either they buy you out of your $150,000 investment and refinance the house solely in their names within 30 days, or we initiate foreclosure proceedings." The plan was no longer a theory. It was a fully formed, legally backed weapon, aimed directly at the heart of the perfect life I had built for them. I walked out of his office, not with the hot fire of revenge, but with the cold, clear certainty of a chess player who sees a checkmate in 5 moves. And I knew, without a single doubt, that my next move would be to their front door. 2 days passed in a state of suspended animation. 2 days of blessed, profound silence from my phone. I spent the time preparing. I retrieved the mortgage contract from Arthur's office, along with a thick, crisp envelope containing the legal notice he had drafted. I read it over and over until I had memorized the cold, unforgiving language. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, grieving mother. I was the plaintiff. I was the primary investor. And I was ready. I knew they would come. Cutting off the money and then blocking all communication was like cornering a wounded animal. A desperate, enraged lashing out was inevitable. It happened on Tuesday evening. It wasn't the polite ring of the doorbell. It was a frantic, angry pounding, the kind that makes your neighbors peek through their blinds. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. There they were. Chloe's face was a mask of furious indignation, her eyes blazing. David stood behind her, looking haggard and utterly broken. I took one slow, calming breath, my hand resting on the cool metal of the doorknob. "Feelings are irrelevant," I heard Arthur's voice in my head. "Assets and obligations." I opened the door. "How could you?" Chloe shrieked before I could even say a word, pushing past me into my small foyer. David followed like a ghost. "Just block me? Like a child? I have been calling and texting for 2 days. I was worried sick something had happened to you." The lie was so audacious it was almost breathtaking. She wasn't worried. She was furious. Her ATM had stopped dispensing cash and was no longer answering the service line. "This is about that stupid comment, isn't it?" she continued, her voice rising with a hysterical, self-pitying tremor. "You are going to destroy our family, your only family, over one thing I said when I was stressed? Do you have any idea how petty, how vindictive and childish you are being?" David stepped forward, trying to play the good cop. "Eleanor, please," he said, his voice pleading. "Let's all just calm down and talk this out. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." I closed the door and turned to face them. I remained standing, my arms crossed, a clear signal that this was not a reconciliation. I let her accusations, her insults, her gaslighting wash over me. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I let her exhaust her first wave of ammunition against the wall of my silence, just as Arthur had coached me to. When she finally paused to take a breath, her chest heaving, I spoke. My voice was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of the emotion she was trying so desperately to provoke. "This is not about my feelings, Chloe," I said. "And it's not a misunderstanding. This is a financial matter." That stopped her cold. She had come here for an emotional fight, a battle of guilt and manipulation she had been winning her entire life. She had no idea how to respond to a business meeting. "For 45 years, I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word, "our relationship has been governed by an unwritten contract. I provide, you receive. I sacrifice, you benefit. I provided the $150,000 for your down payment. I co-signed your mortgage, assuming all the legal and financial risk when no bank would. I have been, for all intents and purposes, the primary financial backer of your lifestyle for your entire adult life." David flinched, but Chloe just stared, her mouth agape. "On Saturday," I went on, my gaze locking with hers, "you unilaterally terminated the personal side of our agreement. You told me my presence was a burden and that my death would be a gift. You effectively fired me from the role of mother, and I accept your terms, which means all that's left is to settle our financial entanglement." I turned, walked to the small table by the door, and picked up the thick, crisp envelope from Arthur Chen's office. I held it out to her. Her hand trembled as she took it. "This is not a discussion," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the steel tower where it was drafted. "This is a legal notification. You have 2 options. Option 1. You secure independent financing to buy out my $150,000 investment and have my name formally removed from the mortgage. My lawyer must have proof of your new financing within 30 days. Option 2. If you cannot, or will not, meet those terms by the 31st day, my lawyer has been instructed to begin foreclosure proceedings." The color drained from Chloe's face. David looked like he was going to be physically sick. They had come here expecting tears and arguments. They had come expecting a mother they could bully and guilt back into submission. They were utterly, completely unprepared for a primary investor calling in her loan. You can't," Chloe stammered, the letter shaking in her hand. "The house, that's our home." "No," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "It's my investment, an investment you are no longer entitled to." I walked to my front door and opened it, letting the evening air rush in. "I believe this meeting is over," I said. "You should probably speak to a lawyer." They stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. the legal document a white flag of surrender in Chloe's hand. Then, without another word, they walked out. I closed the door on their shocked faces, the click of the lock echoing the finality of a gavel. The ultimatum had been delivered. The power dynamic of our entire lives had just been irrevocably and beautifully shattered. After I closed the door on their stunned, ashen faces, the adrenaline from the confrontation drained away, leaving a strange and heavy calm in its wake. There was no victory in it, no triumphant joy. There was only a grim, necessary finality, like a surgeon who has just completed a radical but life-saving amputation. I had cut the diseased part of my life away, and now I had to learn to live with the phantom limb. The next 2 days were the quietest of my life. I knew Chloe would be scrambling, panicking, but her chaos could no longer reach me. My phone remained blessedly silent. In this newfound peace, a whisper of an idea that had been dormant for decades began to surface. I found myself online, not looking at legal statutes, but at pictures of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'd always dreamed of going there, of seeing the raw beauty of the desert, the endless turquoise sky, the vibrant art scene. It had always been a someday dream, a fantasy to indulge in before writing another check for Chloe's emergencies. Now, for the first time, someday felt like a real possibility. The counterattack came on Thursday night. My phone rang, and my heart leaped into my throat. But it wasn't Chloe's number. It was a no-caller ID. My old instincts would have been to answer, worried it was an emergency. But the new Eleanor knew better. This was a classic tactic to bypass a blocked number. This was my daughter, unwilling to accept that the door had been closed to her. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I stared at the phone, knowing a message was coming, one last payload of emotional venom designed to break me. A minute later, the little notification icon appeared. I took a deep breath, pressed play, and put the phone on speaker. I wanted to hear it with my own 2 ears, in the open air of my own home, as a final piece of evidence. Chloe's voice, raw and ragged with fury, exploded from the tiny speaker. It was a sound of pure, undiluted narcissistic rage. "You think you can do this to me? After everything I've done, putting up with you my whole life? You have no idea who you're messing with, you selfish old bitch." I flinched, but didn't turn it off. I needed to hear it all. "You've ruined everything. My entire life is falling apart because of your sick, pathetic little tantrum. You think this is power? Wrecking your own daughter's life? This is weakness. It's evil." Then came the part that changed everything. Her voice cracked, not with sadness, but with the shriek of ultimate victimhood. "You want to know what's really happening? You want to know what your ultimatum has done? David is leaving me. He's been cheating on me, the bastard, and now he says he's done. He says my negativity is too much. This is all your fault. If you had just been a normal mother and given us the help we needed, he never would have looked at another woman. You drove him away. You did this." The voicemail ended with a choked, guttural sob and the sound of the call disconnecting. I sat in the profound silence that followed, the ugly, vicious words still hanging in the air. But I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel a shred of maternal guilt. All I felt was a wave of revulsion so powerful it was cleansing. It was never about me. My daughter's cruelty, her coldness, her wish for my death. It was never about my love being suffocating. It was about her own life, a house of cards built on my money and her husband's fidelity, collapsing around her. I wasn't her mother in that moment. I was just the nearest, safest place for her to spew the poison that was consuming her. It was the shriek of a queen whose castle, built on my bones, was finally crumbling into dust. That voicemail severed the last microscopic thread of connection I had to the woman who had been my daughter. The damage was total. The relationship was unsalvageable. I had my final answer. The next morning, I picked up the phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my lawyer. "Arthur, it's Eleanor Vance. I need to come in this afternoon. It's time to sign the revised will." The second call was to a real estate agent. Then, I sat down at my laptop, the pictures of the New Mexico mountains still on the screen. I closed that tab and opened a new one. An airline website. My fingers didn't hesitate. From Charlotte to Santa Fe. I clicked on One Way. I chose a flight for 2 weeks from today. I entered my credit card information, the numbers a steady, rhythmic mantra of my own liberation. I clicked Confirm Purchase. An email dinged in my inbox a moment later. Subject: Your flight confirmation. It was more than a ticket, it was my declaration of independence. My new life was no longer a dream I was browsing. It was a destination with a date. There was no going back. I had crossed the point of no return. 3 months later. They say the light is different in New Mexico. They're right. It's sharper, clearer, and seems to paint the whole world in more vibrant colors. My new life began the moment I stepped off the plane in Santa Fe and breathed in the crisp, dry air, scented with pinyon smoke. The 2 weeks between booking my ticket and leaving Charlotte had been a whirlwind of logistics, expertly handled by Arthur and a briskly efficient real estate agent. I sold my condo, my car, and most of my furniture. I packed 2 suitcases, my husband's photograph, and the ledger. That was it. I was traveling light for the first time in my life. I found a small, charming casita for rent with a tiny patio that looked out toward the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The mountains became my new constant, their jagged peaks turning from pink to deep purple as the sun moved across the sky. They were solid and ancient and made my own lifetime of drama feel appropriately small. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I took a pottery class at a local studio. My hands, which had spent a lifetime writing checks, soothing fevers, and gripping a steering wheel in rush-hour traffic, were now learning to create something from nothing. I learned to center the clay, to feel its resistance, to gently guide it into the shape of a simple bowl or a lopsided mug. You're a natural, Eleanor. Maria, the instructor, told me last week, her own hands effortlessly transforming a lump of mud into a graceful vase. You have a patient touch. It was funny. I'd always thought of myself as patient, but my patience in Charlotte had been a passive, anxious thing. The patience of waiting for the next crisis, the next demand. Here, my patience was active. It was the patience of watching a pot dry, of waiting for a glaze to set, of allowing something beautiful to emerge in its own time. I was making friends. I was learning the names of desert flowers. I was, for the first time since I was a young woman, rediscovering the person who existed outside the role of Chloe's mom. I was rediscovering Eleanor. But while my hands were learning to build, Chloe's were learning what it felt like to lose everything. The split narrative cuts sharply to a cramped, dimly lit apartment in a rundown complex on the outskirts of Charlotte. The air is stale. Cardboard boxes are still stacked against one wall, unpacked. Chloe Sterling sits on a lumpy, second-hand sofa, staring blankly at a television playing a reality show. She is dressed in the uniform of a mid-range chain restaurant, a black polo shirt, and black slacks. Her hair is pulled back messily, her face pale and drawn. She looks exhausted, defeated. The mail lies unopened on the coffee table. Finally, with a sigh of pure weariness, she picks it up. Bills, junk mail, and one thick, windowed envelope with the imposing letterhead of a bank's legal department. Her hands tremble as she tears it open. It is not a warning. It is not a notice. It is a finality. Official notice of foreclosure sale. The words are cold, clinical, and absolute. The letter details the date and time that her home, my home, the beautiful brick colonial she had lorded over for years, would be sold at public auction on the courthouse steps. The dream was officially dead. The house of cards had collapsed. Chloe lets the letter slip from her fingers. It flutters to the floor, landing beside an empty wine glass. She doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She just stares at the flickering television screen, her eyes hollow, a ghost haunting the ruins of a life she had not built, but had simply inherited and then, through her own spectacular cruelty, lost. The narrative cuts back to the vibrant, warm light of Santa Fe. I sat on my small patio, a simple, lopsided mug that I had made myself warm in my hands. The sun was setting, bleeding purple and gold across the desert sky. I thought, for a fleeting moment, of Chloe, alone in that dark apartment in Charlotte. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel joy at her suffering. I felt a profound, distant, and final sadness, a sense of a tragedy that had been inevitable, a storm that had finally passed, leaving wreckage in its wake far, far away from my new shore. She had wished for my death, but in the strangest, most unexpected way, she had given me a rebirth. And as I watched the first stars begin to prick the deep velvet of the night sky, I knew, with a certainty that filled my entire being, that I would never, ever go back to the dark. 6 months in the desert can change a person. The frantic, anxious woman who had boarded a one-way flight from Charlotte was a distant memory, a ghost I barely recognized. The Eleanor of today was quieter, calmer. My skin was tanned from the relentless sun, and my hands, once soft and accustomed to lotion, were now calloused and perpetually dusty with dried clay from my pottery classes. I had sold a few of my simple bowls at a local weekend market, the $50 I'd made feeling more valuable than any check I had ever written for Chloe. I had a life. It was small, it was quiet, and it was entirely my own. My new routine involved a morning walk as the sun rose over the mountains, afternoons at the studio, and evenings reading on my patio. On Saturdays, I would treat myself to a coffee and a pastry at a little adobe cafe in the town square. It was on one of these Saturdays, sitting at a small table in a patch of warm sunlight, that the ghost of my old life decided to pay me a visit. I had my laptop open, scrolling through emails. There was a newsletter from the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, a reminder about a community potluck, and the usual assortment of junk mail. And then I saw it. An email from an address I didn't recognize, but the sender's name made my heart stop dead in its tracks. David Sterling. The subject line was just one word: Eleanor. My breath caught in my throat. My first overwhelming instinct was to drag the message straight to the trash, to delete it unread. I had built this peaceful new world for myself by erecting a fortress around my heart. David was a part of the world I had escaped from. Letting him in, even through a few lines of text, felt like willingly lowering the drawbridge to a potential enemy. My hand trembled over the trackpad, my cursor hovering over the trash icon. But curiosity, and perhaps a deeper need for a closure I didn't know I wanted, won out. I took a sip of my cooling coffee, took a deep breath, and clicked. The email was not what I expected. It wasn't a plea for money, or a demand, or a guilt trip. It was something else entirely. Dear Eleanor, I am sure this is the last email you ever expected to receive, and I promise I won't take up much of your time. I found your email address through an old university alumni network. I hope this isn't an unwelcome intrusion. I'm writing to you for one reason: to apologize. I have been doing a lot of thinking over the last few months, and there is no easy way to say this, but I was a coward. I stood by for years and watched Chloe emotionally and financially bleed you dry. I benefited from it, and I never once had the courage to stand up to her or to thank you properly for the sacrifices you made for our family. My silence was complicity, and for that, I am truly and deeply sorry. A lot has changed since you left. I moved out of Charlotte a few weeks after the foreclosure. I'm in Austin, Texas now. I found a steady job in logistics. It's less glamorous than my old life, but it's honest work, and it's mine. I'm starting over. And that brings me to the real reason I'm writing. I know this might sound strange, but watching you walk away, watching you choose yourself after a lifetime of sacrifice, it showed me that it was possible. You drew a line, and you refused to be manipulated across it. I had been unhappy for years, caught in a toxic dynamic I felt powerless to escape. Your strength in leaving gave me the strength to leave, too. You didn't just save yourself, Eleanor. In a way, your courage gave me the courage to leave a toxic marriage I felt trapped in. You saved me, too. The twins are with me now on weekends. They're good kids, and they miss their grandma. When they are old enough to understand, I promise I will tell them the truth. Not just about what their mother said, but about the brave and necessary choice you made. I don't expect a reply to this. I just felt, for my own soul, that you deserved to hear it. I hope you are happy in your new life. You've earned it. Sincerely, David. I read the email once. Then I read it again, the words blurring slightly through a sheen of tears I hadn't expected to shed. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of profound, complicated shock. All this time, I had seen my actions as a personal war, a desperate act of self-preservation. I had built my fortress, planned my demolition, and executed my escape, all with a single-minded focus on my own survival. It had never, not for 1 second, occurred to me that my battle could have a consequence for anyone other than me and Chloe. His words reverberated through me. "You saved me too." It was a validation so complete, so unexpected, that it left me breathless. Someone from that life, an eyewitness to the entire tragedy, had seen the truth. He had seen my pain, and more importantly, he had seen my strength. He hadn't seen a vindictive old woman, he had seen a liberator. I sat there in that sunny little cafe for a long time, the email glowing on my screen. The world outside buzzed on, people laughing and talking, the life of a new city unfolding around me. I had set a fire to burn down my own prison, never once imagining that the light from the flames would illuminate the path for another prisoner to find his way out of the darkness. And the sheer, unforeseen consequence of my actions left me in a state of quiet, humbling awe. David's email was a gift I never knew I needed. It settled something deep within me, smoothing over the last of the jagged edges of my grief. The validation, coming from a man who had been a silent witness to my entire ordeal, was a balm on a wound I thought would never truly heal. My life in Santa Fe, which had been a deliberate act of survival, now felt less like an escape and more like a rightful destination. I was not a refugee. I was a pioneer in the second chapter of my own life. A week later, I was in my small garden, tending to a row of surprisingly resilient chili plants, when my phone rang. The caller ID was from Charlotte, law offices of Arthur Chen. I brushed the dirt from my hands and answered, a sense of calm preparedness settling over me. This was it, the final piece of business. "Eleanor, it's Arthur." His voice came through the line, as crisp and professional as ever. "Arthur, it's good to hear your voice," I said, looking out at the mountains. "I have a feeling you have some news for me." "I do," he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. The foreclosure sale of the house was completed last week. After the bank recovered its principal, the remaining proceeds were allocated to the co-signer to satisfy their initial investment, as per our legal filings. "I'm calling to inform you that the final transfer has been processed." I held my breath. "And the amount?" "Your initial investment of $150,000 has been recovered in full," he stated. "In addition, due to the appreciation of the property and statutory interest accrued, there was a surplus. The bank is wiring a total of $187,000 to your account. It should be there by the end of the day." $187,000. I sank down onto my small patio chair, the number echoing in my mind. It wasn't just about the money. It was the sheer, mathematical totality of the victory. I had not just reclaimed what was mine, I had earned interest on my own pain. It was the final, official stamp on the invoice Chloe had been served. The debt was paid. The account was closed. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "I don't know how I could ever." "That brings me to my final piece of business," he interrupted, and for the first time, I noticed a change in his tone. The sharp professional edge had softened, replaced by something warmer, more personal. "My final invoice." "Of course," I said immediately. "Just tell me what I owe you. Whatever it is, you've earned it 100 times over." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The invoice is for $1, Eleanor, which, if I recall, you already paid as a retainer on our first meeting." I was confused. "Arthur, what are you talking about? Your services, your time, it has to be worth tens of thousands of dollars." "It is," he said quietly, "but I'm not sending you a bill." He took a deep breath, and the story that followed was a gift far greater than the money that was now sitting in my bank account. "Eleanor, I never told you this, but the reason I took your case, the reason I understood my own mother, she was in a very similar situation with my sister. My mother was a giver. She was the sun, and she thought her only job was to keep everyone else in her orbit warm, and my sister just took. She took her money, her time, her spirit, until there was almost nothing left." My hand flew to my mouth, my heart aching for a woman I had never met. "But my mother," he continued, his voice heavy with an old, deep sadness, "she never found the courage that you did. She never drew the line. She was too afraid of losing a daughter who, in truth, she had already lost. She died, feeling trapped, used, and full of a quiet, terrible regret. I closed my eyes, picturing this other mother, this other life. "When you walked into my office," Arthur said, his voice now thick with emotion, "you were so full of pain, but I saw this glimmer of steel under it all, and I knew. I wasn't just taking on another client. I was taking on a case for her. I needed to see someone win this fight. I needed to see how it could have ended. Your victory, Eleanor, in a very real way. It was my victory, too. It was for her. So, no. There's no fee." The tears that had refused to fall for myself now streamed down my face for him and for his mother. The money in my bank account was just money, a tool for my new life. But this was a gift of immeasurable value. My journey had not just been mine. Arthur Chen hadn't been my lawyer. He had been my ally, my architect, my partner in a fight that was bigger than just me. "Arthur," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Thank you." "No, Eleanor," he said softly. "Thank you." We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. I sat on my patio as the desert air cooled around me, the setting sun painting the mountains in hues of rose and gold. My fight had not been a lonely, selfish act of revenge. It had been a proxy war for another mother's stolen peace. And in winning my freedom, I had, in some small, beautiful, and unforeseen way, helped to balance the scales for us both. 3 years have passed since that final, healing call with Arthur Chen. 3 years since the last invoice of my old life was officially stamped, paid in full. The woman who fled Charlotte was a refugee, running from the rubble of a life she had built for someone else. The woman who lives in Santa Fe today is a founder, the architect of a life built entirely for herself. My small casita is filled with my own creations, lopsided, colorful pottery lines, the shelves, and my simple paintings of the desert landscape hang on the adobe walls. I teach a beginner's pottery class at the community studio now, finding a quiet joy in helping other people discover the strength and creativity in their own hands. I am financially secure. I have a community of friends who know me not as a mother or a widow, but simply as Eleanor. I am, for the first time in my memory, profoundly and peacefully content. This morning, the mail came. Among the local gallery flyers and a bill for pottery clay was a slightly battered manila envelope. The address was written in David's familiar hand, but the return address was in Austin, Texas. My heart gave a little flutter, not of anxiety, but of gentle curiosity. I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper, the kind a child uses for school. The handwriting was young, a little wobbly, but clear. "Dear Grandma Eleanor, Dad said it was okay to write to you now. He told us the truth about why you moved away. Not the angry parts, but that Mom said some things that hurt you very, very badly, and that you needed to leave to find your own happiness. We wanted you to know that we understand. And we miss you. Dad shows us pictures of your new house with the mountains, and it looks beautiful. We hope we can visit you there one day, when we're a little older. We love you. Love, Sam and Lily." Tucked inside their letter were 2 crayon drawings. One was of a smiling stick figure with gray hair, labeled Grandma, standing next to a purple mountain under a bright yellow sundae. I held their letter to my chest, and the tears that came were quiet tears of pure, unadulterated love. This was not a reconciliation with my past. It was an open door to a future, a new kind of family relationship built on truth and distance and respect, one that bypassed the toxic gatekeeper who had stood in the way for so long. Later that afternoon, I went to the old wooden chest where I keep my important papers. From the very bottom, I pulled out the heavy, leather-bound ledger. It felt like an artifact from another lifetime. I carried it to my small patio and opened it in the warm, golden light. I turned the pages slowly. On the left, the faded cursive of a hopeful young mother. On the right, the angry, block-lettered accounting of a woman betrayed. It was all there. The story of a love that had lost its way, a story of sacrifice turning into self-destruction, a story of a brutal, necessary audit. It was the book of my bondage, but it was also the book of my liberation. I flipped past the last angry number, past the final, staggering sum. I turned to the very last page of the ledger, a clean, empty sheet that had been waiting for 3 years. I picked up a pen. The book had recorded every cost, every dollar, every overtime shift, every moment of heartache. Now, it was time for the final accounting. I didn't write a number. I didn't write a date. I just wrote 2 words, the ultimate summary of my long and painful journey, the final profit from a life I had reclaimed. In the center of the page, in my new, steady hand, I wrote, self-worth, priceless. I closed the book. The story inside was finished. My story, however, was just beginning. I left the ledger on the table and picked up the children's drawings, my heart full. Chloe had once wished for my death as a birthday gift. She thought my life was hers to discard. What she never understood was that my life, my love, and my spirit were never hers to own. In the end, I gave myself a life. And it was worth everything. Thank you for following my story to the end. It wasn't an easy one to live, and it's not an easy one to tell, but it's a necessary one. For years, I believed that being a good mother meant erasing myself, that my only value was in what I could provide. My ledger was filled with the cost of everything I had given away, but I had forgotten to account for the cost to my own soul. If there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that true love doesn't demand your self-destruction. Setting a boundary isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of survival. And sometimes, the most powerful and loving thing you can do, for yourself and for others, is to say no, and to understand that no is a complete sentence. To protect the privacy of the people involved, I've changed some of the names and specific details in this story, but the emotions, the pain, and the ultimate lessons learned are entirely real. I know that my story, in its heart, is not unique, which is why I want to hear from you. The world is full of complicated family dynamics, and we often suffer through them in silence. So I want to ask you a question that I grappled with for years. What was the point of no return in a relationship in your life? That one moment when you knew, without a doubt, that you had to choose yourself. Share your story and your wisdom in the comments below, because your experience might just be the light that helps someone else find their way out of the dark. Thank you for listening with such open hearts. Be kind to yourselves, and never forget your own priceless worth.